Hi, I'm Jarrad Brown, Australian expat financial planner based here in Singapore. Welcome to my video series. Thank you for tuning in today. What I'd like to share with you today is something a little bit different to what we normally go through in terms of personal finance, and that is how much does it cost to leave Singapore and get into Perth for Christmas in 2021. Now, before we get into it today, this is not a story of woe. This is not me complaining about how expensive it is to get home. This is simply to shed some light on what costs are involved, what steps are involved, and even to give some warning on some of the traps that you might want to avoid if possible. Now, it's currently October 2021 at the time of this filming, so that just gives you some insight. These are costs that we have faced, some of them we are yet to face, so they will be estimates, but we have a pretty good idea of what the whole experience is going to look like in terms of that bottom line. Now, before we get into the expenses, I should also highlight that there are still tens of thousands of Australians trapped all over the world. We know that there are families separated, there are children away from their parents. Some of our clients are facing similar challenges, we know that. We certainly hope that with some of these caps being reduced in Australia, and even the fortress of Western Australia starting to think about easing some of the restrictions in terms of travel and entry into the state, we genuinely hope that people can reconnect, if not this side of the new year, then hopefully early into 2022. So let's have a look at what some of these expenses look like. Okay, so let's get into exactly what costs are involved. Now, before we do, I will just highlight that this is for myself and my wife, so these costs are based on two people. I will separate them where relevant, just to give you an idea of what's involved. But if you are looking at traveling by yourself, then obviously just remember that these costs are based on two. So the first thing, and the first mistake that I made, is I booked what I would call a ghost flight, which some people will have heard about on the news, on social media. And that was basically a flight or a couple of flights booked by a third-party provider to fly into Australia via Indonesia. Foolishly thought I was getting a great deal. I booked early, it was a cheap flight, but unfortunately due to changes to the immigration rules in Indonesia, that meant that that flight got completely cancelled. Now, in 3 months or so, we are expected to get a bit of a refund, but at the moment, that's $900 down the drain for now. Now, naturally a bit of an easy one that you can hopefully avoid by booking through trusted agents or directly through the airline itself. So our next cost were the replacement flights. Now, the replacement flights were to fly via Darwin and then on to Perth. So that was $3,113. That is for two people. So around $1,560 odd per person. That then gets us into Darwin. Now, we'll have a couple of taxi fares involved, obviously getting to airports, etc. But we'll get into that a little bit later. We then also have the quarantine costs in Darwin. The wonderful facility known as Howard Springs. If you haven't checked it out, I'd encourage you to check it out. There's plenty of videos on YouTube, plenty of content online. It certainly looks like it's going to be an interesting experience. Now, the cost for Howard Springs is $2,500 per person. So that's $5,000 in total for the two of us. Unfortunately, no discounts for two. So that'll be a cost that has to be faced and covered as well. Now, naturally, there are also the tests involved to both get out of Singapore and then back into Singapore on our way back. Now, the cost to get out of Singapore are on average about $128 per person for the PCR tests, $256 in total. Now, if you don't book early, if you're not organised and need a really quick result, that cost can really ratchet up quickly to about $300 per person. So if you're looking to get out, book your tests early, book a couple of days in advance, depending on the guidance that you're given. They usually have to be done 48 to 72 hours in advance, so make sure you check the rules, stay on top of that one. There are then also PCR tests to get back into Singapore. Now, the average cost of that is $160 per person. So there's another $320 that we need to cover to get back into Singapore. There are also going to be naturally taxis to and from the airport in Perth back to home. So let's just say that's another $100. Now, that's probably a bit of an understatement, particularly when we're looking at Australian taxis, but let's just assume $100 for transport. Now there are some other costs that we're naturally going to face, whether it's buying non-perishables while we're in quarantine in Darwin, or buying some sort of exercise equipment to try and maintain some sort of sanity while we're in quarantine, but we'll ignore those for now. Let's just look at the actual basics that we need to cover. So if we start to add up all of these numbers, we're looking at about $9,600 in total for 2 people to travel from Singapore to Perth for Christmas in 2021. So the obvious question is, do we think it's worth it? Naturally, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't. For me, it was a huge blessing and a huge bonus, assuming that we get on the flights and everything runs smoothly, that we could get back to Christmas to see our friends and family in Perth this year, and we're certainly looking forward to it. Do I think it's something that everybody should be doing? Look, $9,500 to $10,000 is not a small amount of money to get home to Australia for Christmas. So I'd certainly encourage you to do your homework, add up all of the costs, and genuinely assess if it's worthwhile. There are plenty of Facebook groups that are exploring different options in terms of getting home. There are some great travel agents out there as well. So if you found any really great tips or resources, please do feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Likewise, if you have any questions about our experience or about some of the costs involved or any of the process, please do let us know. Really appreciate you tuning into this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.